What if you worked in an office with only about 20 or 25 people? A lot of people spend most of their time at work, more time than they do at home. So you'd probably be pretty close to a lot of these people. You know when their birthdays are, you go out to lunch, there's the Christmas party and company picnics. Now imagine that 20% of the people in your office die of cancer in a short period of time. What if you then learn that your office, where you spend most of your time, where your friends are, is located on top of an old nuclear reactor that was supposed to have been shut down and moved, but it wasn't? So you dig a little deeper and you find out that there was a deliberate cover-up of catastrophic accidents involving radioactive materials in order to gain the use of this land for economic development. What if you learned that the water was contaminated because the land was originally used by NASA to build parts for the Apollo and Space Shuttle programs, not to mention neutron bombs, a nuclear reactor, and radioactive materials, including uranium and chromium? What if you found out that the Department of Energy initially considered cleaning up the site under the Superfund program, but decided the potential for contamination was so remote, they didn't bother to test it? And what if there was a restrictive land use covenant that excluded the building of hospitals on the site? But that's just what they did anyway. And in this scenario that we're describing, not only do 20% of your office coworkers die of cancer, you get cancer too. But you survive to tell the tale. And you're ready to blow the lid on years of conspiracy, deception, and lies by corporate and governmental agencies, and countless deaths and illnesses caused by radioactive contamination. Welcome to Ascension Sisters. This is Cece Kellie, and I'm here with our whistleblower and special guest, Susanne Helene, a former employee of a large, well-known medical complex in Downey, California, that's built on what's known as a brownfield. And we'll go into a little bit more of what a brownfield is and that history in a bit. This location that we're talking about is the location of a former NASA Boeing space program industrial plant, nuclear reactor, a radiochemical laboratory, and a neutron bomb factory with a history of operations going back to World War II. Susanne, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Cece.
So why don't we start out by you telling us why you want to come forward at this point in time and basically blow the whistle on what's been going on at this medical facility.
Okay. Well, after having had cancer, I, in the past year, started to develop a lot of symptoms that they were telling me were an autoimmune disorder. And I started putting two and two together. There were a lot of people in my work unit who had cancer, who were very sick, who died. And I started thinking, something's not right. And for my own health reasons, I decided to quit. But then I started to dig deeper. And when I did, I knew that this just couldn't end. I had to do some more. And so here I am.
Very interesting. So why don't you set the stage for the audience, the listeners? Let's go take a step back and tell us about, what was your job? Give us the details, all of that. And, why did you get into this line of work in the first place? What put you in the situation that you would be exposed to this radioactive environment?
Okay. Well, I'm a psychiatric social worker and, helping people, and especially helping people in need is something I've always had a calling for. And my job was at a hotline and also on a psychiatric emergency team where I would travel around to different hospital ERs and evaluating people who were there because they wanted to harm themselves, they wanted to harm someone else, or they had a mental illness so they couldn't function. And I was there to evaluate them. And my work varied depending on the site. At the site where a lot of my coworkers were getting sick and those who had died, we were a hotline, and these were people would call who had like psychiatric emergencies. and we were 24-hour, 7 days a week, and each of us did either 10-hour or 12-hour shifts at the same location. So we got to know each other really well.
And so basically, so let's take another step back for a second. So you're on this night shift job, basically, and you're traveling around Southern California, and that brings you into contact with these locations. How is that? Is it the ERs that you have to go to? It's your office too. So how are you coming into contact with this location that we're saying that was built on the former NASA site?
Okay, yes, it was the emergency room where the medical center was built on the former NASA site, where they had the reactor and the experimental technologies, and also across the street where we had our offices, where we also had our work unit for the emergency hotline.
Okay, very interesting. Now, when this facility that we're not naming yet, and we're not sure when or if we're going to name it, because this is a highly controversial subject, basically claiming that this, world-renowned facility is, built on some kind of radioactive material. So we're not naming yet, but this facility, it's pretty new. It's the one that we're talking about opened around 2009. Is that correct?
Correct.
And when that opened, you were given a tour, I understand, of the area. Maybe you can tell us a little bit of what that tour was like for this brand new medical facility.
Okay. Well, it's a huge facility, and we were brought through mainly the emergency room, but then also up to an area where they had the brand new state-of-the-art labor and delivery suite. But that wasn't until our tour included some commentary of the delay of opening the hospital. And, and they said it was because of the water tests, that there were unsafe levels of radiation in the water, and that we should not drink from the drinking fountain. And in fact, where the drinking fountains were, they were taped off with a piece of paper over them.
A piece of paper over the water fountains was where you would go to take a sip?
Exactly. So kind of like, don't drink here. In fact, I think there was written, don't drink. So there were, kind of covered up, so no one would drink from there.
And so who was telling you about this?
The person who was guiding the tour, and I don't know her role exactly, if she was, one of the people in the administration or what her role was at the hospital, but she told us that the water had not tested at safe levels of radiation, and that was delaying the opening of the hospital.
And what were you thinking, and how did you feel when you heard that piece of information? That's kind of an unusual piece of information to get on your first day of work.
Yes, it was. And, it raised my eyebrows. Then it occurred to me that this hospital is probably going to be there, vacant for a long time. I just thought there's no way if the levels of radiation were unsafe for a hospital, then they're going to be. Maybe they'll never open. I mean, anyway, that's what went through my mind at the time.
And did you think it was unusual that, why would anyone ever mention, the levels of radiation have tested too high, as if they took that for granted that there are levels of radiation? I mean, isn't that, why would you even think that? Why would anyone think that in the first place? Do all hospitals test for levels of radiation in the water?
I would not know.
Yeah, that seems very unusual. Mm-hmm. So after you heard this, so now you're starting, you're given access to this new facility. It's part of your job. Mm-hmm. And you're going to be there. As we said, people spend more time at work than they do at home, unfortunately. And you're going to be spending time here. Did you ever think about your personal safety after they announced that the water was radioactive?
I did to an extent. I thought about the water, and I'm like, all right, I'm definitely not going to drink the water. But what about when I wash my hands? So
What was their take in the bathrooms on the water fountains? I mean,
no,
or rather on the faucets?
no, you could wash your hands. And I just thought, well, maybe, not enough exposure if I don't ingest it. But I did continue to think about it.
Yeah, there were other people on this tour with you, like a typical office tour. Here's where this room here, this is where this room is. So there were other people. Now, the people on the tour with you, did you work with them, or were they in other departments?
Oh, I worked with them.
Okay. And did anyone react to this news that, hey, don't drink from the water fountains, it might be radioactive? Did anyone have a reaction that you can remember?
No one said a thing.
And why do you think they didn't say anything?
The only thing, I guess, when we go we were night owls, basically. We work a nocturnal shift. So you bring us to anything during the day and we're going to be half awake. So the only thing I could think is the sleep deprivation, maybe just zoning out, or just shocked, any number of things.
Right. And then plus it's your first day of work. You don't want to rock the boat. Maybe there's a little bit of that kind of corporate mentality, which is natural. We're just programmed for that a lot of the times.
Agreed.
So did you ever think about what might have made the water radioactive? Did you give that any thought at all?
Well, all I know is that they mentioned that Boeing had been there before. And I thought, well, is there something with like jet fuel or experiments? Or, I mean, I would only speculate, only to myself. Okay, so I had no clue what that might be. I really didn't know where to go with that information.
In terms of what may have made the water radioactive.
Yeah, I really didn't. It was my own speculation that it could have had something to do with what they were doing with, besides manufacturing aircraft, maybe other things.
Interesting. So originally the woman giving the tour said this was before the facility officially opened?
Yes.
Okay. And how soon after you had the tour and they said the water was radioactive, don't drink it, what was the time frame approximately that you remember between that and then the facility actually opening?
2 days.
2 days. And Did you think that was weird at all?
Yes.
Why did you think that was weird?
Well, my jaw dropped. I remember. How is that possible? I thought somebody must have fudged the test. How could it possibly be too high one day and safe 2 days later? I thought, oh, no, there's something funny going on.
Interesting. So now this medical facility, it was more than one, office space. We're talking about one space in Downey, but there were more locations where you had to be. And I'm just wondering if those other locations also had any problems.
Well, yes, actually, one of the locations I go to is in Woodland Hills, and that was also built on in an area where they had, in fact, moved the nuclear reactor that used to be in Downey up to Santa Susana, and they had a facility on DeSoto, which is where the Woodland Hills Hospital was. So I worked in 2 hospitals that were on what we call brownfields, where they had.
Okay, and were there any other incidents at any of the other facilities?
Oh yeah, at Woodland Hills, I remember the day they were, don't use the sink. Don't drink any water because there's some Legionnaires, but I thought Legionnaires was airborne. they, not an outbreak, but they said that there's the Legionnaire's bacteria, and so we could not use any water, and then they actually did have to close it down for a brief period.
And this is the Woodland Hills
Yeah,
location.
it was Woodland Hills, yeah.
They said there was some kind of Legionnaire's outbreak, but Legionnaire's is supposed to be airborne, but they were blaming it on the water specifically?
Well, they said not to use the water. Yeah, we couldn't use the water in any no sinks at all. There was just, we couldn't, only bottled water, but no, I don't know why.
And was this incident ever explained beyond this blaming it on Legionnaire's disease?
No. Mm-mm. Things are just really not explained there. It's pretty much, here's, don't do this. It's like on a needs to know basis, essentially.
Were you ever filled in that case? Was there ever a need for you to know, or were you always kind of on the outside?
I was on the outside, especially I would travel. I would go and evaluate patients at Woodland Hills, and also in the Downey emergency room, and then leave. So, I may not be there for the entire duration of my shift. I was there frequently, but not enough to really, get the skinny on what's going on.
Interesting. And when these outbreaks happened, the radioactive water, when the first facility was opening up, the Legionnaire's outbreak at another facility, was there any, gossip or any just underpinnings of any kind of information going back and forth with the workers, the doctors, or anyone that you had contact with?
Okay. Well, I'll tell you, in Downey, yeah, I just would hear buzz about Boeing and, contamination that wasn't contained well, but I never understood why that was. So like something wasn't cleaned up, or it was just in little bits like that gave me the impression that there was more than just aircraft being manufactured there.
Okay. So we mentioned in the opening that a pretty, high percentage of people that you worked with, had cancer and died. And there were other illnesses as well. Maybe you could talk about, at this point in time, after you started, how many workers had cancer, and then how did that number grow, and what was happening with these people?
Okay. Well, let's see. So, when I started, one of our medical directors had been battling cancer that apparently was metastasized in 2 other areas, and other organs affected, and so she was in and out of chemotherapy. And another coworker, I hadn't gotten to know him really well at that time, but he had cancer that just went into, prostate cancer had just gone into remission. And so that was early on. And as I continued to work there, we had a guy who was a picture of health, and would always, he was all about fitness, and he gets diagnosed with non-smoker's lung cancer. And then another guy, he worked as like an administrative assistant, very quiet, unassuming person, and suddenly he was gone. And, I remember the boss saying, "Oh, he's a faker," or, and, I thought, well, say something like that about a coworker, and he doesn't come back again, and we find out, incidentally, he died. So, and nobody talked about that. So, wow. That was, kind of, that kind of moves into, like 5 years of my employment at that point.
Okay. So over the course of 5 years, about how many people would you say altogether developed, the various issues, cancer or otherwise?
Okay. Well, so, I all I can tell you is this, I was there, for 9 years. Okay. And over that time, there were 9 different people who developed cancer or other very mysterious illnesses, dying not long after they were discovered, and also becoming very sick with treatment-resistant illnesses, having multiple surgeries for growths that keep coming back, and then of course I myself had cancer and in surgery for that. So that's an awful lot of people.
Right. So how many people?
9 people.
9 people
Yeah.
Developed cancer.
No, not all cancer.
Not all cancer. Okay.
Some of them were. There was one person, and it's really hard to know. Apparently he had some kind of brain tumor, or some type of hemorrhage or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even think they even discovered what that was, because he died relatively, just like within less than a month of the initial symptoms.
So there were 9 people who had serious illnesses related to cancer or
Mm-hmm.
cancer itself.
Yeah.
And about 4 people died.
Yeah. Okay. So as far as if you want to know cancer specifically, okay. So we had, our medical director at the time, she died. A coworker who had the lung cancer, he died. Another coworker who had cancer, he went into remission and survived. And then a 4th coworker was out for a year, and her cancer, she has a pretty serious cancer, colon cancer, and she survived. We had now 2 coworkers. It's hard to know. I don't really know what they had. All I know is it's something to do with a brain something. I really don't, not exactly sure, but all I can tell you is that he had something that affected his brain, and he had liver failure, and he died. And then another guy, completely mysterious malady, he died of some form of strange illness. So those were the individuals who died. But of the 4 who have cancer, 1 died. 2 died. 2 lived. Actually, I lived too. And then the 2 people who died of other types of illnesses.
Interesting. So did anyone think it was unusual for so many people to get sick and for there to be so many fatalities in really a short period of time, all clustered in the same, work environment?
I don't think anybody, seriously, I have to say, I think I'm the only one who has put this together, because of my own situation, because nobody else has. And I don't mind. I don't know if you mind if I kind of tell a little bit about what we do. The unit is all about handling mental health emergencies. These are some serious issues that we deal with, and it's very intense. And you're on the phone dealing with one emergency after another. And when someone's gone, you just got to keep going on. It's just like you're in the trenches fighting a war, and your buddy falls over next to you, and you don't have time to stop and even think about what happened. So it's that intense there. So I think people just become immune to their surroundings.
Interesting. And you mentioned that you had cancer. You are obviously surviving. When did you first notice anything negative health-wise in this experience?
Oh gosh, it's kind of, well.
And also ultimately, what were you diagnosed with? Maybe start with that, your ultimate diagnoses.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, at first it was, like a year before, I had been diagnosed. I found out I had a benign a tumor in my pituitary gland, and then within the next year I started to have very abnormal menstrual bleeding, and then it got to a point where I would find myself being, it's kind of embarrassing, but personal, my personal care, it was, I would drive all night, okay, and sometimes I couldn't make it through my shift because I had, kind of a mess to clean up. I remember getting so dizzy I would have to hold onto the wall sometimes, And I didn't know what was wrong, but this is a strange thing about the job is that you keep pressing on, and then, it's not until, it gets really debilitating, that you actually do something. And in that case, I ended up going to the doctor, and they had to do a couple of procedures and then a biopsy actually after a DNC, and told me I had endometrial cancer. In fact, showed me a picture of the tumor that was in my uterus.
And that was followed by a hysterectomy.
Yes, they told me that's all. They had to do a total hysterectomy, and that would go, in my case, that was curative.
And most recently, you were also diagnosed with a number of other things.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yes, and that kind of leads me to why I'm here at this point and blowing the whistle, because to tell you, so I developed a cluster of symptoms, starting off with my thyroid was underactive, hypothyroidism, but it wasn't for lack of thyroid stimulating hormone. It was apparently I had antibodies that were essentially attacking the thyroid tissue. I had developed also symptoms of fatty liver disease and insulin resistance, meant that I was developing a type 2 diabetes. So all of this together, they were telling me I'm looking at Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune disease. And at that point, I look around me. I look at the fact that I had cancer. I see that, I'm in this environment that is intensely stressful, and there's something about the environment, my physical environment that's not right. So all that together, how many more wake-up calls did I need?
And so where does that leave us today? So obviously your colleagues got sick, 9 people had cancer, 4 people died. One of your colleagues went partially blind. There were other disabilities.
Yeah.
This out of a very small group of people in a very short period of time. Now you get sick too. You're here to tell the tale. So, and then we're looking at the radioactive water and this Legionnaire's outbreak. And where does that leave you today? Where are you today?
Okay. Well, today, I'll tell you, I just decided I'm quitting this. I quit. I sold everything. I took a cross-country trip to start my life over. And I said, I'm going to take a risk. It's better to wait and better to start over than to just stay where I was and see what would happen, which I didn't think was going to be very good.
Well, this has been very revealing, and we want to thank you for being so transparent and vulnerable and starting to tell your story. And we're going to continue to tell Suzanne's story, and we're going to go into the background of this location in Downey and look at what NASA and Boeing and the space program was doing there, and whether or not this nuclear reactor was removed from the location, and whether or not the site was tested. And we also have some soil and water samples, new ones, that we're going to tell you about, and we're going to have them tested, and we will tell you about it live on the air in the coming weeks. So we invite you to join us next week for another episode of Ascension Sisters with Cece Kellie and Susanne Helene. Thanks for tuning in.
Tobacco companies spend more than $11 billion marketing to teens each year. They look at you as tomorrow's customer. You are the target. Prove them wrong.
The Starlight Lounge presents an evening with the Progressive Box.
Oh, what a great audience. Let's dim the lights for this next one. Oh, too much. There it is. Gotta get things just right. Like Progressive's Name Your Price tool. Tell us what you want to pay, and we help you find coverage options that fit your budget. And now, the mood is right. Wait, the lights are back on again. Trudy, can you? And now it's completely dark.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.